and one shows a campaign to surveil and harass an artist engaged in free and peaceful expression. All three of these cases show that if you report such abuse, U.S. law enforcement will respond and demonstrate that law enforcement was able to disrupt these plots and bring perpetrators to justice. Last month, when I announced the National Security Division's new strategy for countering nation-state threats, I said that our approach would be driven by the gravest threats, including the alarming rise in transnational repression. This is an example of what I meant. Authoritarian states around the world feel emboldened to reach beyond their borders, to intimidate or exact reprisals against individuals who dare to speak out against oppression and corruption. For example, the Department of Justice has recently brought cases against individuals involved in Belarus's forced diversion of a commercial flight to arrest and detain a Belarusian journalist and dissident. We've pursued those who participated in Iranian plots, targeting dissidents living here, including one conspiracy to kidnap an American Iranian activist in New York. We've prosecuted agents of Russia and Egypt for illegally surveilling and targeting dissidents of those authoritarian regimes, and we've exposed attempts by the PRC and Saudi Arabia to deploy agents inside technology companies to obtain private information on critics and to impede the exercise of free speech. Today, we add 3 more cases to this list. For the Justice Department, defending American institutions and values against these threats is a national security imperative. Transnational repression is part of the range of tactics that our adversaries employ to try to undermine our democracy, our economy, and our institutions. And it is a threat not only to the people in the United States, but also to people around the world who seek to exercise their basic rights to freedom of expression and to stand up to authoritarianism. This activity is antithetical to fundamental American values. We will not tolerate such repression here when it violates our laws. We will defend the rights of Americans and those who come to live and work and study in the United States. We will not allow any foreign government to deny them the freedom of speech or the protection of our laws or to threaten their safety or the safety of their families. Today's cases, which United States Attorney Breon will talk about more in a minute, demonstrate that the Department of Justice will protect American democracy and ensure that all those within our borders have access to equal justice under the rule of law and enjoy the protection of the U.S. Constitution. As I said, these alleged plots are separate cases, and each will be prosecuted based on the facts and the law in federal courtrooms. And each of these defendants is presumed innocent unless they are proved guilty in a court of law. Authoritarian regimes seek to deprive people of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. These cases reflect the United States' commitment to ensuring that freedom and justice prevail. Now I will turn it over to the United States Attorney Peace, who will lay out today's charges.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Today, I'm announcing the unsealing in the Eastern District of New York of 3 criminal complaints against the perpetrators of transnational repression schemes targeting members of the Chinese diaspora community in the New York metropolitan area and elsewhere in the United States. All of these victims were targeted because of their pro-democracy views, because they chose to exercise their freedom of speech here in the United States. In 2 of the cases, agents from the People's Republic of China's Ministry of State Security, also known as the MSS, directed the action targeting victims on U.S. soil. The MSS is the PRC's civilian intelligence and secret police agency, ostensibly responsible for counterintelligence and political security. As these cases show, the MSS has been targeting pro-democracy activists living in the United States with harassment and smear campaigns, spying on them to help the PRC government target them for arrest, and even planning to physically harm an activist, a veteran of the U.S. military, to stop him from running for U.S. Congress. In the 3rd case, the defendants took directives from the PRC government to publicly discredit PRC nationals who are pro-democracy activists living in the United States. As part of their smear campaign, the defendants tried to bribe what they thought would be an IRS official to obtain a victim's federal tax returns and plotted to destroy a work of art made by one of the activists who is a sculptor. Through their illegal conduct, the defendants and their co-conspirators imported the PRC government's repressive policies onto U.S. soil. Members of the Chinese diaspora community, both in New York City and around the rest of the country, must be free to express themselves on politically sensitive issues without fear of reprisal from the PRC government. Our office will not permit efforts by the defendants and co-conspirators to erode the civil rights of U.S. residents on account of their Chinese ethnicity and their beliefs. Now, the defendants in the complaints unsealed today include: 1, an individual working for the MSS who tried to stop a candidate from being elected to the U.S. Congress, including by discussing a physical attack on the candidate who was a U.S. military veteran. 2, the head of a pro-democracy group who gathered intelligence and betrayed members of his own organization and the Chinese diaspora community in New York City while acting under the direction of 4 MSS agents. And 3, 2 residents in Long Island who have been working under the direction of an executive with a PRC technology company to target pro-democracy PRC nationals residing in the United States. The defendants face a variety of charges, including conspiring to act as agents of the PRC government, to commit interstate harassment, and to bribe a public official. So I want to give some acknowledgments before I get into more detail about the defendants and the charges. I want to give a special thanks to FBI agents Ryan Campbell, Michael Carmack, Garrett Ego, Jason Moritz, Edward Tam, Kevin Minton, and Joshua Ray Willis. I also want to acknowledge my team in the Eastern District of New York, Assistant United States Attorneys Alexander Solomon, David Kessler, Artie McConnell, Emily Dean, and Brian Morris, and our paralegal, Benjamin Richmond. And I'd also like to acknowledge Scott Claffey from the National Security Division, who's been closely working and collaborating with our lawyers in the Eastern District of New York. So let me talk about each case and the defendants in those cases. The first case, the defendant, Chi Ming Lin, is a citizen and resident of the PRC. He is alleged to work on behalf of the MSS. In September 2021, Lin hired a private investigator in New York to disrupt the campaign of an Eastern District of New York resident currently running for U.S. Congress, an individual identified in the complaint as the victim. The victim was a student leader of the pro-democracy demonstrations in Tiananmen Square in 1989, who later escaped to the United States, served in the United States military, and became a naturalized U.S. citizen. In September 2021, the victim, who was then living in Long Island, New York, announced his intention to run for a U.S. congressional seat in Long Island in the November 2022 general election. In hiring the private investigator, Lin explained that he and the individuals for whom he was working did not want the victim to be elected to Congress. Lin said that he would pay whatever the investigator wanted as long as the investigator could disrupt the victim's campaign. Lin first asked the investigator to provide information about the victim, including the victim's address and phone number, which the investigator provided. Lin also requested that the investigator unearth derogatory information about the victim, or if no such information could be found, that the investigator manufacture such evidence, including by creating a scandal involving a prostitute. Then, in December 2021, Lin proposed that the investigator also consider physically attacking the victim to prevent his candidacy. And as alleged in the complaint, Lin stated, quote, "But in the end, violence would be fine too, huh? Beat him until he can't run for election," end quote. Lin also said that, quote, "A car accident end quote, would make the victim, quote, completely wrecked, end quote. And as recently as yesterday, Lynn was in touch with the investigator and stated that approval had not been given yet on the payment terms for a plan to involve the victim in a scandal, and noted as part of the reason for the delay, quote, because the Communist Party, as you know, so many things, end quote, and added that, quote, it's not just one person who can call the shots, end quote. Lynn is charged with conspiracy to commit interstate harassment, contrary to 18 U.S.C. Section 1028, as well as conspiracy and attempt to use a means of identification in connection with the interstate harassment conspiracy, contrary to 18 U.S.C. Section 2261A. The misuse of a means of identification charge carries a maximum sentence of 15 years, while the interstate harassment conspiracy charge carries a maximum sentence of 5 years. The second case, Shujun Wong. Wong is a well-known academic and author who helped start a pro-democracy organization in Queens, New York, that opposes the current communist regime in China. However, as alleged, since at least 2015, Wong abused his position and status within the Chinese diaspora community in New York City and elsewhere to collect information about prominent activists, dissidents, and human rights leaders, passing that information to the MSS. Wong operated under the direction and control of 4 MSS officers. At the MSS's direction, Wong has gathered information on people and groups that the PRC considers subversive, such as Hong Kong democracy protesters, advocates for Taiwanese independence, and Uyghur and Tibetan activists, both in the United States and abroad. While posing as a like-minded individual, Wong met with pro-democracy activists to spy on them, to gather non-public information about them, such as their current political views, planned public appearances, and travel plans. And during a border inspection, Wong was found in possession of a long list containing the telephone numbers and other contact information for pro-democracy activists and advocates so that he could better track them for the MSS. Wong provided the information he had gathered to the MSS using encrypted messaging applications and emails, as well as during face-to-face meetings in the PRC. At least one Hong Kong democracy activist about whom Wong reported to the MSS was later jailed by Hong Kong authorities on political charges. Wong initially lied to law enforcement, falsely denying that he had contacts with PRC officials or the MSS, when in fact he had been secretly reporting on U.S. residents to the MSS. But Wong later admitted to federal law enforcement officers that he was working with MSS officers. Wong is charged with acting as an agent of the PRC government under 18 U.S.C. Section 951, criminal use of means of identification under 18 U.S.C. Section 1028, and false statements under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. The foreign agent charge carries a penalty of up to 10 years imprisonment, while the other 2 charges carry penalties of up to 5 years imprisonment. The third and final case, Fan Frank Leo, Matthew Zaburis, and Chong Jason Schwen. Leo is a resident of Jericho, Long Island, and was born in the PRC. He is the president of purported media entities called Congress Web TV Station and the World Harmony Foundation. According to open source information, Leo has held multiple positions with international organizations and programs and campaigns in which he has interacted with high-level PRC government officials. Zaburis is a bodyguard and former correctional officer for the state of Florida. He recently relocated from Ocala, Florida to Oyster Bay, Long Island. Schwen is a PRC-based employee of an international technology company headquartered in the PRC. Schwen is an intermediary between the PRC government and Leo. The defendants engaged in a transnational repression operation to spread negative publicity about anti-Chinese Communist Party activists residing in the United States by harassing them and attempting to publicly discredit them. The criminal complaint focuses on these defendants' harassment of 3 pro-democracy activists living in the United States. Leo and Zaburis acted under Schwen's directives. They believed that Schwen was receiving directives from the PRC government. The harassment scheme included a plan to destroy the artwork of one of the dissidents, an artist who made a sculpture depicting PRC President Xi Jinping as a coronavirus particle. That artwork was later demolished in the spring of 2021, and no one has been charged in that act of vandalism. The harassment scheme also included Leo's payment to a private investigator based on Long Island to bribe what they thought would be an IRS official to get the federal tax returns of one of the dissidents. The defendants planned to publicly disseminate information about any potential tax liabilities of the dissident to publicly discredit him. The scheme also involved plans to spy on the dissidents. In one instance, Zaburis pretended to be an art dealer in order to meet with the dissident artist, whose sculpture was later destroyed. While meeting with the dissident, Zaburis surreptitiously installed surveillance cameras and GPS devices around the dissident's workplace and on his car. And while in the PRC, Schwen accessed live feeds from the surveillance cameras and the GPS devices. The defendants made similar plans to electronically surveil the other 2 dissidents. And while using the cover of Leo's media organization, the defendants planned to interview the dissidents in mock media sessions. And Schwen provided outlines for these fake media interviews and designed questions to elicit answers that were intended to humiliate or publicly discredit the dissidents. The defendants intended that video or audio clips of these statements could be used in PRC propaganda materials targeting the dissidents. Leo and Zaburis are charged with conspiring to act as agents of the PRC government in violation of 18 U.S.C. sections 371 and 951. All 3 defendants are charged with conspiring to commit interstate harassment in violation of 18 U.S.C. sections 371 and 2261A, and criminal use of a means of identification in violation of 18 U.S.C.